Hello, everyone. Jessica Coons here. It is a red letter day at WCIA. We are here to talk about an Emmy award-winning investigative piece. You might remember this piece. It revealed a methane leak in Livingston and LaSalle counties that endangered both people and the environment. Some really important work done by our very own Mark Maxwell, who broke the story. And he's here with us to dive a little deeper into how this story all came together. So, Mark, jumping back here, can you talk about how you first found out about this story?
Sure, Jess, and thanks for doing this. First of all, we should point out this was a huge team effort. We had Lindsay Jones digging into a lot of the documents here, who was a data reporter for us, an investigative reporter. Kevin Lighty, even, our meteorologist, was lending us his drone to get the bird's eye view of what was going on. Our management was very gracious in creating time and resources. And Jess, as you well know, and maybe many in our audience can imagine, we work in a sort of a 24-hour news cycle where we want to know what's new now. So when you walk into the news director's office and say, hey, I've got some dead crops and some bubbles in water, and oh, by the way, it's about 2 hours from here. Nobody that watches our TV signal, or very few people, will actually live in that exact area. You can imagine most news directors might not have the patience to go along with that. But we had a former state investigator at the Department of Natural Resources who became really what amounted to a whistleblower. He had raised issues inside the state at IDNR several times about what was this persisting problem of an underground natural gas storage field and all of the different issues it had generated for the farm families that lived around there. He brought these to our attention and said, you know, guys, this is a big deal. I really wish somebody would look at it. In fact, he was sort of hoping that maybe like 60 Minutes or some other big national outlet would take a look at it. That's how important it was to him. And he really felt like this story had gone decades without being noticed. So we went out there, we looked at it, we encountered a family who had owned property there for 150 plus years, since before Abraham Lincoln was president. They were farming that very land. And then in the late 50s, early 60s, this big gas company came to town, and they started buying up parcels of land. Their whole idea was to bury this natural gas, not in a aluminum canister like many people might imagine, or in some contained place, but actually just using the Earth's geological structure under this big capstone. It's a little nerdy, but if it was quite fascinating to learn this is how they bury natural gas. They just find this big pocket of like limestone or gravel deep underground, and they just pressurize this natural gas to bury it there. And they hope that the rock, the impermeable cap rock, they call it, serves as this lid to keep it all down there. And they use these wells as kind of like straws to withdraw the gas out and use it to power your home, to warm your home, to turn your stove on. Or they pressurize more gas and keep putting it back down there. Well, what happened was in the 70s, I should say I think it was in the late 60s, Nicor, or then the Southern, which now is the Southern Gas Company, decided we want to take these two big bubbles of gas, about 1,500 to 2,000 feet underground, and join them together. Well, we went back into these state records from the 60s and found that the state actually cautioned them against that at the start, because they found a geological fissure or a crack in the lid that might allow some of this gas to start snaking and bubbling its way up toward the surface. And the company told the state at the time, in essence, don't worry, we don't think that's going to happen. And if it ever does, we will let you, the state, know, and we'll take care of it. Well, it was not until the 70s, just a few years later, when all of a sudden farm families started noticing crops dying. And we found records of these complaints that had largely been ignored for decades. And so that the problem seemed to persist and get bigger. We went out there, performed some tests, found there was actually evidence of all this gas still going on. And even still, a year after breaking this story, the latest gas loss report that Nicor has given to the state was heavily redacted. There's still an ongoing fight about trying to get exactly to the bottom of just how much methane, which is a greenhouse gas that traps heat and warms the planet at a rapid rate. We don't exactly know how much of that. We know it's a massive volume escaping the original bubble down below the Earth. They're trying to capture it at this secondary level before it actually gets to the surface. Even that isn't quite working, because enough of the gas is reaching the soil and the sky and the streams. So it was pretty interesting. But Jess, as I'm sure you can tell, just describing all this, we knew we kind of had to wrap our hands around this in a way that we could tell it visually for television. It wasn't exactly a made for TV story when all these documents started coming into our inbox.
Sure, Mark. We're going to get a little bit into the process that went into putting this story together for TV. First, let's pause here, let people watch the story that first aired in October of 2020.
This is one of 8 underground natural gas storage facilities Nicor maintains in Illinois.
I was surprised that natural gas was kept in this fashion.
In the early 1960s, Illinois granted Nicor 2 permits to bury gas out of sight, deep underground in naturally occurring aquifers in Ancona and nearby Garfield. Later, despite geological studies warning a fissure in the capstone could cause a leak, Nicor still merged those 2 fields into one massive storage facility. Attorney Ruth Robinson represents the Solomon family farm that sits on top of the gas field.
The gas seemed to be migrating out of the underground storage where it was supposed to stay.
Jim Stevens inspected wells on gas storage fields for the Illinois Department of Natural Resources for decades.
You cannot know with 100% certainty what is 3,000 feet below ground.
Right. How do you inspect that?
You don't. You don't.
He visited the Ancona Garfield site several times and raised concerns. What are we looking at here?
That's a hand-dug water well on property that is now owned by Nicor that is sitting there bubbling because of the natural gas inside the water vein. This well is 35 foot deep. They're supposed to be storing at 2,500, 2,800 feet. So it's actually leaving the storage formation through fractures and migrating up to the surface.
That's the very reason why the Solomon family filed a lawsuit against Nicor in 2015 to try and shut the storage facility down.
They don't want this gas bubbling up onto their property.
That lawsuit failed. Nicor appealed. The court kicked the case down to the Illinois Commerce Commission, where it languished, and the Solomon family started running low on money.
Methane gas is not hazardous to your health other than as an explosive hazard or as an inhalation hazard. There's houses in Kansas blowing up because of natural gas leaking into houses.
Nicor's website has instructions for how to spot a gas leak. 1, look for discolored vegetation, blowing dirt, or continued bubbling water. Listen for a hissing sound, and smell for the distinctive rotten egg odor of natural gas. When we went to the Solomon family farm to investigate, it didn't take long to find all 3.
And watch what happens when we put this gas detector near this hole. There is no doubt in my mind there is something coming from out of this hole right now, something cool, something that smells terrible, and something that sets this gas detector off. We're going to see if we can detect any leaking gas coming from the bottom of this pipe. That's a positive test for leaking gas. Now, listen carefully to see if you can hear the bubbling beneath.
It shouldn't even be there.
The vent pipe?
Yeah. There shouldn't be gas coming to surface like that.
Nicor's massive underground natural gas storage facility is supposed to house the gas hundreds of feet below the surface here. But somehow, evident by this crop death, enough of it is reaching the soil to kill the crops here and scar the cornfields for miles around.
There's one conclusion, that the cap rock, the lid is not working. And, but then nobody does anything about it. Year after year, it's getting worse. You know, there's more and more crop damage. Decades of gas just going up into the atmosphere, and there's nothing being done about that.
Nicor tells us in a statement, quote, a small amount of gas migrates from the storage zone to a shallower zone through natural geological features or conditions that existed prior to the construction of that storage facility in the 1960s. It says it has systems in place to prevent natural gas from getting up into the atmosphere. Quote, we have installed secondary collection wells that capture the gas in the shallower formations, recompress it, and inject it back into our transmission system.
Okay, so Mark, after people watched that story, you could see all the work that went into it. Did anything surprise you as you were investigating, as you went out to that farm?
Yeah, maybe the biggest surprise was the things that actually couldn't make it into the story. The smell of the rotten eggs oozing out of the ground and the temperature of that pressurized cool air. I mean, imagine putting your hand down near this like strange looking hole in the ground and feeling what is a pretty high pressurized cool like breeze, almost like someone turned a fan on or the AC on at your house was coming out of the ground. I'd never seen anything like that before in my life. And then when I went on Nicor's website and it said, if you smell or see something like this, back away. Don't turn your car on. Don't light up a cigarette. Don't turn on a lighter. Don't turn on your phone. Don't turn on your car because any of these things that might spark something could ignite what they believed was this methane. Keep in mind, if this were to snake up under someone's crawl space or basement somewhere, we've seen news reports in other states in years past where a gas leak can lead to detonating an entire home. Now, this was a very sparsely populated rural area. There wasn't a lot of risk that that would happen, but there was some. And so we contacted the company there. They sort of dug in a little bit. We tried to get more information out of them and to figure out exactly what the risk was. But I think that had to be my biggest surprise was one, actually finding these examples of the bubbles in the ground. I mean, visible right there, something that was supposed to be 2,000 to 1,500 feet below the surface. And here it is where it's not supposed to be. And we could also sort of smell it and then setting it off with that gas detector. To me, those things help to bring the story to life, I hope, in a way that, these environmental stories often just people kind of tune them out. I get that. They're often political. There's parties that dig in and say, well, how much is fossil fuels really warming the planet? And there's this big political fight. This to me was the first chance I've had to push all of that bickering aside and actually look at the evidence of something happening in real time. And that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you can't ignore those drone shots of those crops that are dead in that area you went to.
Right. And we should point out, one of the reasons we knew that those crops dying, Nicor is very careful in their legal language, how they describe it, but they have made payments to farmers for crop loss. So they've kind of gone through we're aware of other instances where they've actually purchased up land that used to belong to other farm families where those problems were happening. They just bought the property. But there are some farmers that said, hey, we don't want to sell. This is our home. We've been here for more than a century, a lot longer than you have. We want to keep this. So there has been this effort to kind of make the problem go away. Well, the symptoms, not the actual problem, which right now is still this big underground natural gas storage field, which is continually leaking and seeping gas up above this cap rock that's not supposed, it's still happening today.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the follow-ups you've done since this story originally aired? I know we've got several articles on our website since that first story.
Sure. We became aware that the Attorney General had opened an investigation into NICOR through some correspondence using the Freedom of Information Act. We were looking for public records to follow up on this. There was another issue on a different site. It's still unclear exactly which of these two issues the Attorney General was investigating. But we also got a lot of attention from state lawmakers. Some of them said, what's going on here? We got to do something to regulate this a little bit more. But they haven't really been able to wrap their hands around it yet. That's a little bit interesting too, Jess, because you'll remember the General Assembly just passed Governor Pritzker's very aggressive climate change agenda. Here we have a company heavily regulated by the state, actively polluting with methane, which is traps heat at a much higher rate in the short term than carbon does in the atmosphere. So here, some of the scientists and experts tell us that if you actually go after methane more aggressively, you can move the needle on climate change right here and now. Whereas carbon is sort of like this long-term issue that's going to be around for a long time. That's that long-term issue. Methane is a problem now. It's actively ongoing. We followed up with an atmospheric scientist who teaches at the University of Illinois. He advised the Obama White House on these issues, and he took a look at some of the raw numbers that we had measuring this gas. And basically he said, if all of the gas leaking from that big underground storage facility is actually making its way into the atmosphere, over the course of 10 years or so, rough estimate, that amount of gas would be equal to the Aliso Canyon disaster back in, I believe, 2015 in California. That disaster caught the attention of the world because it happened in such a short span. Here we have this smaller amount, but steady stream of methane leaking, and it's largely gone ignored. I think more people are going to pay attention to this story in the months and years to come. I know some of the people who study this at some of the universities have taken an interest in this story, and they want to know more about just how much methane is actually going out there, because it's something to the effect of like 100,000 vehicles, if they were to be driving through and just polluting nonstop all year round. That's how much methane is going up into the atmosphere.
Clearly, this story is not over.
Yeah. On that note, we've been tangling with the Department of Natural Resources to get some more information just recently. We don't want to speculate, but within a few minutes of this story airing, I believe it was a Wednesday night about a year ago on October, within a few minutes, the director of the Department of Natural Resources emails the Attorney General's office, which is the state's lawyer. And there's a link which is totally redacted. It says, call me. Very next morning, after they have this exchange, the department head of the entire state agency reaches out to guess who? The field inspector who monitors this exact field, and they have this ongoing discussion. And in that same email thread, you see conversation about this very story that we broke. So we know that they're watching this closely. We're still trying to get the state to just tell us, hey, how much gas is leaking? I'll give you a little teaser. NICOR submits these documents to the state. They say every quarter, every 3 months, this is how much gas is leaking. When they did that, they apologized. They said, hey, we're going to start submitting these reports in a more timely manner. We had stopped kind of like giving the state this information as quickly as we were supposed to. Sorry, whoops. Here's the new information. They also sent along this disclaimer, and they said, hey, we advise you, the state of Illinois, to redact this info from the public if anybody comes looking for it. If any other report, think about that. Here's public information that should be of a public interest at the very least, and a private for-profit company is telling the state, we recommend you keep this secret. Don't tell the public about exactly how much we're polluting here. And so far, the state has taken their recommendation and they haven't actually given it to us. We're fighting them on that, and we hope to get that information for the public to look at.
Well, and I'm sure you will get that information. Mark, congrats on winning this Emmy. What does it feel like to know that your work had such an impact?
Well, I got to tell you, it's very humbling. This isn't even false modesty. We had a huge team effort. I mentioned Lindsey Jones, Kevin Lighty, our management that put a lot of time into this. I think even you and some other anchors were looking over scripts and making sure it was all buttoned up. We wanted to make sure we did this story right. I got to tell you, if I can just be candid, going into last night, I have always been sort of an irreverent journalist who looks down on all these, they're just patting themselves in the back with these award shows. Isn't that kind of silly? It's all just a bunch of self-congratulating nonsense, so to speak. And then I felt kind of hypocritical as the countdown music began Saturday night, because I'm like, hey, we might actually win this thing. I knew we were in the running. And then all of a sudden we won it. I wasn't even sure if I had heard it right. I'm like, did they really? And all of a sudden people started texting and saying nice things on social media. And I'm like grinning ear to ear. And I think to myself in the back of my head, you're kind of a hyphypocrite. You just said 30 minutes ago that you hate these things, and here you are just relishing in it.
Feelings can change. Feelings can change, Mark.
Yeah. It was the evolution of ego, I think, which is that's all we need in TV news is a little bit more ego. But no, it was really nice to see all of the people say something, and I really hope that this is a moment where people can take a look at an important issue and understand our collective obligation to be good stewards of our planet. I talk to a lot of people that are Republicans, that are Democrats. Doesn't matter their political stripe, but they're farmers, and they know more than anybody that we've only got one of these planets, and we've really got to take care of it. And so, this doesn't have to be a political question. I know we cover politics here in Springfield. This is really a question about, are we taking care of this one planet we've got? What are we doing while we have it? And so I hope that that's the lasting effect here. The statue will be nice. Certainly, it's great to see WCIA get a little bit of recognition for this big team effort. But I hope that the lasting impact is the reporting and the story itself.
Sure. All right. Well, congrats again, Mark. Thanks for breaking everything down for us. And until next time.
And there will be a next time. Just thanks.
Thanks.